So, welcome to another episode of Be Remote Podcast. For today's episode, we have with us Tristan Pollock. He's an American tech entrepreneur and startup investor who has created and sold to companies and invested 30 million into Silicon Valley startups via 500 startups. Currently, he heads community at CTO.ai, and we're gonna talk about how to build and grow communities remotely. So, Tristan, over to you. Would you just want to introduce yourself and a bit of your experience in building remote communities and also what you do at CTO.ai?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm some sort of split of entrepreneur, investor, and community builder. Spent the last decade building and selling to startups, and then the later half joining Silicon Valley VC, 500 startups, and running about 10 accelerator programs for them, investing through their seed fund, and kind of helping hundreds, if not thousands, of companies kind of go through the program, from pitching and messaging all the way down to fundraising and getting your first customers. So I've spent a lot of time on the early stage of startups, kind of around that pre-seed to like post-Series A, on both the operator and investor side. And the community builder part comes in a way that it's just this philosophy of how I've always built companies and why I've cared about the organizations I've been a part of. And it's this, I call it kind of my movement building approach, where I really laser in on the mission of the organization, and I find kind of these like growth channels or community growth hacking ways to figure out how to amplify that mission and thus bring people back into your community and bring them back to become your customers.
Sounds interesting. And how large is your team at CTO.ai, and where they're located? Are they distributed?
Yeah, so at CTO.ai, and that's CTO.ai as a URL. I'm the head of community, which also kind of means I'm the kind of everything growth person. We're a small team, we're 20 people. The team is, it's kind of a hybrid model, but obviously during COVID, we were very distributed. So we have people in San Francisco. We have me here in Minneapolis, where I've been, and this is where I grew up over my childhood before moving out to San Francisco, and then most of the rest of the team is based in Canada, between Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. So most people are based in Vancouver, but right now I would say it's completely distributed. Like there's office space, but people aren't really using it. And so we've done a lot. We've definitely implemented a lot of interesting ways of working that are more focused on a remote first environment.
Interesting. And can you just elaborate on your work inside the company? Like, what are you responsible for? What are your goals, short term and long term?
Yeah, on a community side of it, I'm growing the community. I've grown it probably about 10x over the past year. We're building this kind of developer operations community, or DevOps for short, and it's a place that kind of sits one level on top of what we're doing as a platform. But the platform is really the enablement piece of the philosophy of the community, which is, we want to make developer operations and be able to scale elastically, very flexibly, and inclusively, like very globally, for the startups that work with us. And so a lot of times, a startup raises money, they're trying to figure out, how How do I scale? How do I get oversight into my development team? How do I hit my milestones and deadlines? And then that kind of enter the CTO platform. So I'm basically growing this community, increasing the amount of engagement in the community. We're solely focused in a Slack channel, but that's also spans into social media, that spans into any sort of touch point where someone is interested in what we're doing, or they're interested in the greater community and ideas that we're sharing. So I spend a lot of time, and when I say movement building, I think of a very much of a cross-functional approach to growing a company and growing a startup. I think that you need all the different aspects under the growth umbrella, marketing, PR, community, all these things play together in order to tell your story and to go out and find the channels to tell it. So that will resonate the most. So in addition to kind of like being this head of community and scaling the community and scaling the engagement, I also spend time in like figuring out where these channels are, what sort of thought leadership can we do, what sort of fun things can we do to kind of engage people, and share our kind of culture, ethos, and vibe of the community outward. One of those examples could be I did a video with celebrities explaining DevOps tools. And so they were explaining, Kubernetes and Docker and AWS. And these are people like David Hasselhoff, Flavor Flav, and Carol Baskin from Tiger King. So like, it's like trying to find these ways to kind of get attention, get people excited, and to kind of funnel that passion back into a gathering place. And then be able to empower them with the tools that we have built.
That's a cool idea of bringing celebrities. Probably they would also have explained it in such a simple way, right? And a lot of people would have found that very interesting as to how DevOps could be explained to a layman.
Yeah. I mean, that was probably one of the most the highest traffic bringers to our site that we've done to date. I think we've got, and like on Twitter alone, I think it was 150,000 views. So, inevitably it went viral, and just in this one specific community, not even like having the same sort of, mainstream kind of pop culture sort of thing. It was just like, this is very, very specific, very, very niche, but like it shows that there's a lot of interest in how to understand these tools and how to engage with them in a fun way.
Super cool. So let's just go back in time and revisit your first experience of building a community. How did that idea come to you, and how do you go about figuring out how to build a community for the first time?
Yeah, for the first time. Well, I'd probably go back to my first startup. And, at the time, community was something that was, localized. Community was like your neighborhood, and it wasn't as talked about as much as a kind of a business building philosophy. But we did a lot of those things. And I think we took what basically that startup was a social impact media platform that we had organizations like people from Ashoka or the Skull Foundation, as well as social entrepreneurs blogging, telling stories, writing pieces of solution journalism. Here's like the challenges and the problems of the world, but like here's people and organizations and solutions that could work to help fix these things. And so that's something I believe strongly about, is like not just, writing about doom and gloom, but like if you're researching a topic, then sharing about how you can actually solve that topic and what sort of solutions are out there and how can we help. It's kind of like the ending a documentary with, here's the things you can do now after we got you really excited about making change. And so I always came from this kind of intersection of impact and technology. And part of that is like, that was my foray in the community building. It was like, all right, now we have, 200 contributors to the site in 25 different countries. How do we build this kind of cohesive glue between everyone. We were using this tool that I think Twitter bought and doesn't exist anymore called Posturous. And like, just, it was basically like an early Slack, and we would have people in there, we'd be sharing information, setting a code of conduct, encouraging, people to, meet each other, all sorts of things like this. We started going into like video as well. And, after a few years, we were acquired by a larger media company that was focused on corporate social responsibility, which is now, ESG and environmental, social, and governance. So we were like very early in this kind of social entrepreneurship, social impact space, and very early in like building that community around our writers and contributors, as well as the greater community. And if you think about community, there's many layers to the onion. We have our team, which is like the tightest knit part of the community, like the center. And then we have our writers, and then we have all of our readers and our audience. And so the community is kind of spans out in those ways, and, eventually maybe turns more into audience over community, because, people are reading, but maybe they just read it one time and leave, versus, someone who's consistently coming back and engaging with us, in different channels.
Interesting. And what are the challenges for you to set up your first community? Like as a rookie community builder, what you felt you really should kind of bring to the game in order to do this better the next time?
Yeah, I think the hard part is, starting a community for sure, getting 0 to 1. And to figure that out, a lot of times you don't have a ton of support or resources. You're trying to figure out, okay, like, how can I engage with this community? And like, one, where do I even have people gather? Two, like, you take some time to figure out who's the 5% or the 1% of the community that's like more active. They're more like the community ambassadors. You haven't had a chance to maybe identify them yet. And then from there, like, you're also like, you're trying to, grow the community, but also engage with these, maybe like people who are more active, have a larger voice in the community. And when you don't maybe have like a ton of structure or a ton of things you can give. So I think like the big challenges are always, how do I get those first, 100 people to love what we're doing, or these first like 100 people that are really like excited by the greater philosophy of what we're trying to do. So, in our case, maybe solution journalism, maybe they don't even have to read Social Earth. That was the startup, but like, they just need to be excited about solution journalism. Maybe that's a channel to get people in the beginning, and eventually, they kind of like, oh, cool. Like, the people putting this on are like actually, putting words behind the action, and they're doing this as well. And I'm kind of interested in that too. So you can definitely start out a community in a way that is more philosophical, and one layer out of the onion that you're starting to create, where it's a common interest, a common value, something like this that's bringing people together. Let's say, like, for example, like a lot of communities, I think, start out of newsletters or Substacks today. They start out of like content that people are writing about a certain topic, but then, then they might create a Slack channel or Discord, and then start bringing the more dedicated people actually into a community. So before, maybe it was more of this audience or a lightweight community, and now it's moving into a community where people are sharing and interacting. And then your job is to not just do all the interaction, but to also encourage these moments of collision between other community members. That could be like, there's like an app called Donut in Slack that basically sets people up who haven't talked to each other in the Slack. And so there's like little things like that, and maybe like, or like having product feedback sessions or meetups, right? Like, that's traditionally, people have been done a lot of like these offline meetups localized in a certain city or geography so that they can meet each other. And I think that's kind of your job as a community builder, to build relationships, not just with yourself and the community and with like maybe the company or the product in the community, but also with the community members in themselves, so that there's a strength building and growing within that community.
It sounds very interesting. And any particular people that you followed in initial days to kind of understand more about community building as a marketing channel in itself? Like any people that you still kind of go back and look at their work?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I would highly recommend the CMX community. It's like a community of community builders. David Spinks created it. I used to go to his events in San Francisco where they would bring together, a community builder summit, basically. Now they do it online. So they not only have like a lot of great resources, like the SPACES framework, which is an acronym that stands for support, product, acquisition, contribution, engagement, and success, which you can find on their site. But it's basically like a framework to community building and community management. And here's all the different aspects that you can use. And they also, I think are kind of the premier community, because they also have all these premier community builders that are a part of it, speaking at their conferences, participating in their Slack channel. There's some other folks that I think are pretty good as well. Greg Eisenberg has been doing a lot of community strategy, and he's a really amazing product person. You can find him on Twitter. He's got a lot of great insights. And then also another person, Mac Redden, who's the founder of ComSoar, which is this kind of community operating platform that helps you kind of understand some of your like KPIs and things like that. He's also been really, really great. And I think ComSoar and like their subsequent community club, which is their kind of community of community builders, is a really great tool. And another tool that could be cool to check out is Orbit. I think they just really have a really great philosophy around how to understand community building. And you could find them at orbit.love.
Sounds good. I'd certainly look up these people. Moving on to another very important topic for us, which is tech community building. So I think a lot of companies like yourself are trying to build communities for developers or other skilled individuals in the tech community, right? What do you think techies look for in a community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think when it comes to developers, or it comes to like highly skilled individuals, I think they're looking for the needs are much deeper, and they're looking for knowledge. They're looking for solutions. They're looking for products that are, they can have a part in building. That's why so much developer work and communities center around, and the strongest ones sometimes center around open source. And that's not just like, it's like the product, there's feedback, there's contribution, people are contributing to these projects. There's a lot of those components, I think, that like center around like something that's like open source in the developer world. But even for me, as like let's say like one of the communities I'm most active in right now is like the climate tech community, and technology solving climate change. Is I'm looking for a place where I'm getting, there's kind of a vetting that happens, right? Like people are sharing things that are like, this is really good work, this is really good news, like this is an article worth reading. I can give you feedback on like, hey, I'm looking at investing in this sort of company. Oh, okay, like direct air capture is, here's the high level thoughts from the industry, here's the current like tempo or the feeling of like what scientists are saying about this. So I think there's like a lot more of this knowledge pursuit, or the ability to there also might be like the ability to like become an active contributor, so there's like that engagement part of it, but there's also just like, hey, like I want to be a part of this because I'm learning. You're making me look smart. Like I'm like up leveling myself and my work. And also like, I can share this work back to the community and get their feedback on it. And so it's like, I think that's when it comes, there's like a true utilization there and true reciprocity where there's this, the people there that I'm interacting with are able to support me, but I can also support them. And I think there's that give and take is pretty important for setting that for a community. But I think that's also very important for like highly skilled individuals that want to come. They don't have a lot of time to interact with a lot of communities. So they just need the few best communities for them that, really focus on the topics they're interested in.
Interesting. So there would be a lot of effort that goes into like initially building this tech community, I'm assuming, and a lot of moderation to maintain the quality. And at some point, you kind of reach a stage where a lot of content and value addition is crowdsourced, where the community itself is kind of adding value. I think that's the stage most of the communities would want to reach, including the tech community, right?
Yeah, I think you want to see a graph over time of like more contributions, whether that's content, that's submitting repos to an open source project, or, I think you want to see that those opportunities increase over time as the community grows more engaged, as the community goes larger, providing these opportunities for people to, these engagement opportunities, whether that's, creating a design, giving feedback on the product, writing a blog post. I think you want to see that level increase over time. And so you're, as the community builder, doing more, you're creating more of the opportunities for engagement versus you're creating the engagement.
That's insightful. So I think over a period of time, what would have happened is there's a lot of extrinsic value that the community is kind of giving to each individual, and not just the intrinsic value that they are perceiving out of just reading the content on the community.
Yeah, I think that you're definitely on the right track there. I think you're going to see I think a lot of people think, okay, Slack or Facebook group or Discord, and like there's this kind of reading, that happens, and like probably 90%, who knows, like it's a lot of times there's this 80-20 rule, but like might even be more 90-10 or even more, where 90% of people are reading and not saying anything. And maybe they're not even putting an emoji on something, so like it's very hard to tell who's engaging. So it's like, then when you have those people engaging, you have to really engage them, and also, understand, like provide these opportunities for other people to kind of like motivate them to, to move into that realm of like, okay, well, maybe they're not comfortable in doing this, but maybe they're comfortable in doing something where it's like they can do it kind of behind the scenes, like let's say a poll, right? More anonymous sort of stuff that like you can contribute, but you don't have to actually like, hey, like here's my like specific thought on this, So I think you have to kind of feel out your community and what the demographic and what's interesting, and you're constantly experimenting. I think that's why I think of like community growth hacking as something I'm more attuned to, because growth hacking is all about experimentation, right? You're looking at like, what can I do to get the highest impact with the lowest effort, and I'll run experiments and then scale up the things that work. And I think that's a very similar approach that I take to community building, because I'm more on the builder side and less of the management side. I'm more of like, how do we like grow this? How do we get like a lot of engagement? How do we really get people excited and passionate about what's going on in the community and what's going on with the company? And that's kind of plays back into that movement building strategy that I talk about, because I want to build a movement with this community. I want to get people like, pouring into this community because they're so excited about what's going on. They think it's really game changing. The thought leadership resonates. and now they have, and thus the motivation is high, and there's ways that, and we basically then provide these ways for them to plug in.
Cool. So have you had to kind of reward the content creators in your community extrinsically and portraying that these rewards have been shared? Have you done that anytime?
Rewards for being engaged in the community.
Yeah, engaged in the community as a content creator, not just a consumer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there's like, rewards could be as straightforward as, I'm getting paid to even create content, right? Like I think there's things like this, like let's take like Lyft, like, Lyft in the US originally would, once they had drivers that were, doing ride sharing that were really good and highly rated, they would get paid to then onboard a new driver once they were like on the system, and they'd be like, hey, do you want to pick this person up and like show them the ropes? And so it's like, I think there's even components like that, right? Their driver communities and now helping onboard the other, but there's also a financial incentive too. So it's like you're rewarding highly rated people, but with a financial incentive, but they're also helping you with like work and in the process of making more really great drivers. So I think there's like, I think crypto is a really interesting example of this, where you see platforms out there, whether it's airdrops or, you get tokens for your engagement with the community, for doing certain things, for taking jobs, for filling out your profile, for, you get like high interest rates for, doing different, giving them leverage. There's all these different ways that the crypto communities are, financially incentivizing their community members, which is pretty interesting. I think it's actually probably the forefront of community building right now.
A great example. I think lots to read into that. And do you recall any community or your efforts where you've had to actually collaborate with another community to kind of uh, get attention to your own community?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think a lot of times, let's take like an example from the developer world, which I'm sure spans into a lot of other spaces, is like just even doing it like a co-hosting a webinar. And, it's like, well, one person, these guys have an email list, those guys have an email list, and they do this webinar together collaboratively, and they share some interesting insights. It's, that takes the pressure off even presenting it for like a full hour. Instead, you have like it split up plus Q&A, but then also both sides are sharing it with their, all their contacts. And so I think you think about, community building the same way. It's like, it could be things like that are like, maybe feel more like marketing, but like you're just working on these like, novel types of collaboration that basically gets exposure to other communities by providing value. And so I think that's kind of the key part, is like making sure that your mission aligns with your content, in line with these collaborations, so that when people see that, then they see like, oh, there's true value here, and I understand clearly what they're trying to accomplish. And so maybe not a subset of that audience from that webinar go back and join the community. And we've definitely done a lot of things like that.
Sounds interesting. And if you've seen a lot of difference in community building happening before COVID to post COVID, what are your thoughts, like how this whole community building activity has changed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the obvious side is, people are, there's been a lot of venture capital falling into community building tools, online event tools, Hopin, Comzor, all these types of platforms that, basically enable these things like Zoom, right? And, it's like, so there's just these new, Icebreaker was another one. I think there's just a lot more of these things that, like take even like the donut example, the Slack app that I gave before. It's like before you might not have, if you were all in an office, right? Like maybe if Donut sets you up, you'd go like have a coffee or something, or maybe that wasn't even necessary because you just randomly see people and like, hey, do you want to grab coffee today? But now, you need these kind of prompts. You need this kind of like structure because there is no ad hoc ability to just connect with other people on your team or in the greater community because there just isn't these physical in-person events, right? So I think as those come back online, the really great thing that was created out of COVID was that people are, now you can build this community of people of similar values or believe in the same mission, internationally very easy. And it's a lot more status quo than it ever has been. Where before, I think there was a lot more geographic focused communities that maybe had the same mission, but it's also you're in the same city. And now it's like, well, no, maybe I want to know like what the best people are thinking about this topic, no matter where they are in the world. I just want to have that be in the part of the community with the best insights. And so I think that's actually, it's a very subtle shift, but it's a very big shift at the same time, is that there's just an openness now to online communities and there's a lot more tools and technology to support them.
Cool. So what would be a suggestion to other community builders to go about figuring out where their community is? Let's say if for your own example, right, of building community for CTO.ai, where did you go and find developers, like your initial, let's say 100, 200, 500 developers, to kind of invite them and bring them? So what would be advice to other community builders who are just starting out?
Yeah, I think from a lot of successful community builders out there, I think that you can, follow on Twitter, or you can join some of the communities that I mentioned that I think a lot of these people are in. It's like, you're basically like putting yourself out there, right? You're talking, you're really excited about a subject, topic of product. You're interested, you're like us, maybe there's a parallel community that you can join and, start to make a name for yourself within that community. But basically you're putting out content, you're putting out thoughts, you're putting out ideas, and you're just drilling home what you really care about. And I think that's where you see like, hey, if I'm just talking about, Amazon Web Services over and over and over again, at some point, maybe that leads to a career path to joining Amazon. If I'm working on this startup that I'm like really excited about, climate technology, and I'm just like climate tech, I hashtag everything. I share a lot of news. You're just kind of building yourself into like a community leader, and you're trying to, either create a movement or join a movement. And so I think that's kind of the key to getting started. And a lot of startups have begun that way, right? Like I'm a newsletter, and like out of that became a website that became a really engaged product. But I think there's just like these basic things where you're networking, you're talking to other great people in your field, you're doing the same, like kind of putting out these thoughts online and building these relationships and like sharing, refining your own thesis and ideas that like start to pull people in that are interested in what you're talking about. I think that's the easiest first step, right? It's just, you just need to like network yourself into the industry and start sharing those thoughts. So as you feel comfortable around the topics that you're caring about and you want to build that community around.
Cool. I think that's a good advice. Even I would like to kind of pick up on this. So, what are your favorite books that outside of your work, which have helped you, you think, in becoming a good community builder?
Yeah, I think there's a really good book that just came out that was by David Spinks, the founder of CMX, the community of communities I was telling you about, called The Business of Belonging.
Business of Belonging. Okay.
Yeah, Business of Belonging. I've also, heard that like a lot of Airbnb community people have read The Art of Community by Charles Vogel. But like, I'm also like, I'm less of like I use business books like a Bible, maybe, like, I like read just like I kind of reference the certain chapters and try to flip to them, versus like reading them all the way through. Cause I find a lot of times just business books to be kind of boring. But there's like other kind of books that I think will teach you things that maybe you don't even realize, right? Like they might be because they're related to the topic you're doing, or they might be something like I'm reading this other one called Blueprint for the Revolution, which is by this Serbian nonviolent protester who helped overthrow Slobodan Milosevic when that area in the world, and Serbia was just in a really bad place and a lot of war and a lot of dictatorship. And so it's interesting. Basically, the name of the subtitle of this book is "How to Use Rice Pudding, Lego Men, and Other Nonviolent Techniques to Galvanize Communities, Overthrow Dictators, or Simply Change the World." And so it's like things like that. I think like having one of the big components of this book is like having fun, using comedy, even in the most intense situations where you're trying to overthrow a dictator. It works because it gets people excited about what you're doing. And I think there's a lot of these subtle emotional things for when it comes to community building that you have to tap into. Treating people like humans. And what would you do with your friends if you were trying to get them to go on a trip with you, or like trying to host an event for like the people that you're trying to host an event for your own community, your own family and friend group, and like what would you do to get them excited about it? What would they care about? And I think asking a lot of those questions goes beyond even like business books. It goes into books like this. It goes into books around psychology and tribes and just like even like PR and like what, thought leadership, like, how do you, once you have that idea, how do you share it? So that's why I often default back to like, I think that there isn't just one way to build a community. And I think once you get into a community, you start to realize what people really care about, how to like be creative and encourage the growth of that community, or even to your own sub community further. So I always encourage people to be creative around it and not get too stuck in like it has to be done this way. I think there's a lot of frameworks and pieces out there now for community builders that are helpful to get started, but don't let that stunt your creativity and the innovation that you could bring around some of these ideas.
Cool. And what kind of companies you look forward to kind of reading more about in the community building space, which you find promising? Any such tools?
You said any kind of
Tools that you're yet to try out, or you recently tried out and you found very promising, and you kind of look forward for them to kind of innovate in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think Discord is getting a lot of hype, and inevitably like your community gathering space should just be easy for your community to join it, right? They're already using the tool. Maybe they're already using Facebook groups, so you create another Facebook group, or they're a business community and they're using Slack, so it's easy to add another Slack. Or maybe they're tired of using Slack and they just email is better, and you make an email listserv or an email group. So like thinking about those things, but also going to where the current behavior is, I think is important. And then like some of the tools I mentioned before, I think there's going to be a lot more on community tracking. Right now, it's kind of very disparate and all across, how many people attended my event? How much web traffic are we getting? Like how many people signed up for the community? It's like all these different places, but I think there's going to be more tools that like pull that together as like a dashboard. Even if you're not using something like Gecko Board or whatever, you could end up using something like Comsor or Orbit, like I was mentioning before, where I think they're going in that direction. They want to have a platform that you can monitor and understand where your community sits and like who you can encourage to then move into a more engaged status. And I think that's going to be the really breakthrough moment for communities, because I think community is kind of like, it's like the new marketing, right? It's like authentic engagement. You're encouraging you're creating a gathering place, and you're not just like trying to like advertise your goods over and over again. You're like letting people have a say. And I think that's also why you see crypto communities doing what they're doing, because they're like co-ops. People have like a stake in the game now, right? Like they own a part of the company, essentially, right? So like I think that sort of stuff those models are interesting too for communities of, community owned and led. And so that's kind of, I think, where like some of this creativeness can come out of like the real core of what you want to create, right? Like having that vision of what you want to create is really important. And you'll figure out how to track it and manage it in all these other ways. But that kind of core of what the foundation of what you want to create and how you want to have community involved and not just marketed to, I think is important differentiation.
Sounds great. I think we are nearing close to our ending time. And one final question I have for you is, let's say if we were to interview somebody else in the community building space, whom should we try bringing on as the next guest?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the people I mentioned before, Mac Redden, Greg Eisenberg, David Spinks, they're like some people are just really like ahead of the game, and they've been thinking about community for a decade. So I think anyone in that realm, or a part of those communities, I think if you are a part of like the CMX community, you'll find a lot of amazing community builders in there, and they blog about a lot of them on their site too. I think they were just talking about someone who had been leading community at like Salesforce for 10 years, So like, I think there's I think, kind of participating and joining in some of these communities, you'll come across really amazing people.
That sounds great. I would certainly extend an invite to them and see where it goes. Thanks so much, Tristan, for your time, and we hope to connect again in near future, and probably kind of invite you to further podcasts on certainly a different topic that you might also be interested to speak on. Any final message to community builders out there that you would like to throw in?
I'm on Twitter at Pollock, Pollock. So happy to always take questions and meet other people that are really passionate about community, and as well as people that are in the climate tech community who are really passionate about reducing the effects of climate change over the coming decades.
I would introduce you, or rather, I think point you to a friend of mine from my college who is building something very interesting in micro change towards bigger climate change, affecting bigger climate change. So,
Yep.
uh, yes, so that startup is based out of India, but I think I'll certainly share their work across to you.
That's great. I would love that.
Yep. Thanks so much for your time, Tristan, and look forward to connecting again.
Of course. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yep. Same here, Tristan. You have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.